Meet Madison. Her husband has never heard her scream like that. Her daughters are petrified. With a worried look on his face, her husband asks, "Honey, are you okay?" Madison forces a smile and says, "Yeah, I'm totally fine." She excuses herself to go to the bathroom, takes one look in the mirror, and uncontrollable tears begin to flow. Madison is the general manager at a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. She leads a team of 25 people, and at home, she has a loving husband, two daughters, aged 6 and 4, and a baby boy who's 18 months. She wakes up at 6 a.m., quickly brushes her teeth, and rushes to the kitchen to get breakfast ready. Her phone is buzzing constantly, each notification jolting her with anxiety. The demand at work is building because tomorrow, a Fortune 500 company is hosting their biggest event of the year. And just yesterday, they demanded significant changes to the meticulously planned itinerary that was already scheduled. As the kids eat breakfast, requests pour in. "Mommy, can I have orange juice? This pancake is burnt. Can I have another one? What do you think of my drawing, Mommy?" Madison, torn between being a present mother and checking her emails, feels the strain. At 9 a.m., she arrives at the office to find her direct report waiting nervously. They want to start the event 2 hours earlier, she says. Madison knows how difficult it's going to be to make these last-minute changes. While coordinating with various departments, the event organizer calls. With no apology, he demands reassurance that everything would run smoothly. He says, "We chose you because we thought you could handle it. If all goes well, we'll work with you again, and if not, this is a one-time deal." After hanging up, Madison is bombarded with emails and messages from all the different departments, and she's doing her best to accommodate everyone, to answer every question, to solve all the problems, neglecting her own sanity. It's 5 p.m. all of a sudden, and it's time to go home. And on the drive home, her mind is racing with worries about the event. She walks through the door, and immediately her daughters ask, "Can we have pizza tonight, Mommy? Ooh, how about ice cream? Can we have ice cream too?" Madison snaps. No pizza, no ice cream. You're going to eat the food that I cooked. I just walked in. Can I have a minute to relax?" Minutes later, she's in the bathroom, crying her eyes out. Today, I'll speak with health and wellness coach Rebecca O'Brien on how to help Madison deal with this pressure. Rebecca, after 15 years in international sales and marketing, struggled with burnout herself. Now, she's a certified stress management instructor, offering keynotes, workshops, and one-on-one coaching to help empower leaders to prioritize their health and well-being. I'm eager to hear how Rebecca would advise Madison on how to overcome this tendency of putting everyone else first at the expense of her own well-being, while still being an effective leader and a great parent. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Rebecca, one thing I notice in you and a lot of your content, what I see and what you put out there, is a great deal of vulnerability. You've been very honest about your experience of burnout, what you went through. And before we get into Madison's story and what she's going through, I'd love for you to expand a bit on what happened and how you came to that realization of burnout. So take me to that moment. What was the moment when you realized that you hit a wall?
Mm, yes. This one can be quite interesting because, with that honesty and vulnerability as you share, and I thank you for those kind words. I actually didn't really notice or understand it at the time it happened. And I remember that so clearly, I should say, because as I called my boss that day, I'll never forget it. After I got diagnosed with both depression and burnout, I called her up and said, I'm going to basically be on sick leave for 2 to 3 weeks. I thought, I said, I'll check my emails at home. Don't worry about me. Everything will be fine. I'll stay in the loop, and you can contact me whenever you want. And that was kind of basically the message and short conversation I had with her. But then waking up the next day, I couldn't actually get out of bed. And that was basically it. Physically, my body shut down, and that was me for 6 months. So
Wow.
it had a lot of signs and symptoms, I would say, up until a year leading up to my final, being diagnosed with depression and burnout. But I actually didn't understand it or really accept it, I would say, until that my body physically said, okay, we're taking over here. You're not listening. We're gonna basically make you listen.
Wow. And I have to say,
Mm,
Rebecca, that's so often the case. And
mm,
what I find to be what happens to people, especially very ambitious professionals such as yourself,
mhm,
who don't notice the signs,
mm.
don't notice the signals until it's gotten to that breaking point.
Yeah.
Now, having done the work that you've done over the years, and now this is
Mm,
your area of expertise and where you help people, I'm sure you can reflect back and be able to
mm.
say, these were the signs and I just didn't notice them
Yeah.
or I didn't take them seriously. And
Yeah.
so for people who are listening who may be experiencing some of those signs or those signals,
Mhm.
can you talk to what were the signs that you overlooked? What were some of the things that you recognize now? Had you noticed them earlier, could have
Mhm.
prevented it getting to that point?
Yeah. Yeah. There were quite many signs. They were very and I say sneaky in the kindest way, because I could understand from a simplicity of, being a 35-year-old, going to the gym, eating healthy, focused at work, go, 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 checking all the boxes, in a space of ambition, as you say, or a professional and wanting to climb the career ladder. I felt that something was off. That was probably my biggest point. I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Relationships, friends, traveling, doing all the things. But like you said, when I look back at it, of course, I could see the signs, and that is kind of what led me to, okay, I need to book a doctor's appointment. Like I need to check this out. What is this? Because it wasn't really adding up. And over that year, as I shared previously, it was almost a year up until when I finally got diagnosed, because they couldn't really figure out what was the core issues, or what was going on, and what the root causes, and all of the things, because they thought it was my thyroid, or if it was a brain tumor, or I was at dementia hospital taking tests the last month before. So I had like signs of lack of energy, irritation, hair loss, stomach aches, all the signs and symptoms. I would say really neck pain, couldn't really sleep at night. I had the nausea, and I would say, twitching in my fingers and within my face and eye, and all of these were basically the stress symptoms. If we look at that, or with anxiety, how does that manifest and how does that show up? But during the visits to my doctor, they always ask me, are you stressed? Are you not sleeping? Do you have young kids? What's going on in your life? And for me, it was kind of like, I don't really have, I don't feel stressed at all. I don't have anything, really holding me back, or taking time out of my day today. I had the weekends free, all of these things. But this had been going on for so many years leading up to the fact that I had my blinders on and ignored signs and symptoms, I would probably say for many, many years back, stemming from childhood, going into college, career, movie, all of the things that the smaller signs then became bigger. And I felt like, okay, I can't really do this now. And I think the brain fog and the concentration and memory was a huge part of me, especially towards the end.
Yeah. And when we have so much on our plates, and I know that you did at
Mm,
that time, we chalk it up to other things. We chalk it up
yeah.
to, oh, it's just something that's going to pass or whatever.
Mm,
But it requires being, I've heard you say, being hyper
mm,
aware, being self
yeah.
aware,
Mm,
and then also being intentional about
mhm,
how you check in with yourself throughout the day.
yeah.
And I heard you say this in I think it was an interview that I watched of yours where you talked about a mindful work day. And I liked the
Mm,
term, a mindful work day. And it's
yes.
about how you create a bit of that structure and intentionality for yourself because you're
Mhm,
still ambitious. You're still
mm,
someone who works hard. I know you are,
yeah. Mm,
but you found a way to make sure that it doesn't lead to the kind of pitfall that you fell into in the past. So
yeah.
tell us about what is a mindful work day? What does that look like?
Yes. I mean, I was really the expert of, keeping my head down, saying I'm fine to everything, wearing different masks throughout the day, and just pushing off any let's say frustration or symptoms or things that were coming to my awareness in that sense to basically be I'm going to shut down everything else or put that in a backpack and just focus on work. So I wasn't really checking in with myself. I was the only thing I was checking was how many cups of coffee can I drink, to keep awake and keep myself going for the day. So a mindful work day today and what that looks like both for myself and my clients, it is of the simplicity and the simplicity of keeping things very clear on what matters to me, what am I prioritizing, am I taking aligned action, with my values and my goals and the priority of a list today, but also keeping that simple to three things on our to-do list instead of 10. And when I finish those three things, I can add another three. And it's also of like checking in and checking out of the day, being able to make a very clear sign to yourself, like I'm closing the books, I'm closing this calendar, work is done for today, as well as multitasking, staying away from the urge of, I would say, we try to multitask and we think we're great at it, but scientifically it's we make twice as many mistakes and it takes us twice as long to complete that task. And then checking in with ourselves throughout the day of really knowing how am I feeling, being able to pause in between our meetings or pause in between our coaching calls or our work day throughout of taking those few minutes. What have I had to eat for lunch today, or do I need a snack? How's my body feeling? How much water have I drunk today? So there's all of these like small things, but to keep it very simple of with our calendar, with our work schedule, with what our goal is for the day, and to also bring us, I think, into the present moment of that day instead of like
Yeah.
stressing over, 3 weeks ahead and that project, even though that project is very important, but keeping it right here and right now of how can I show up for myself and how can I make this day as successful as possible, both for my health and productivity, really.
Yeah. So often our approach of complexity is what
Mm,
creates the problem. We put way too much on our plates. We are attempting
hmm
to get so much done, and it ends up being something that drains us of energy and we're less
mm,
productive. I agree with the approach of simplicity.
yeah.
Three things rather than 10. And the science behind multitasking, I'm so glad you
Mm,
brought that up because the evidence is there.
Yeah.
When we are attempting to multitask, first off, the mind can't do that. It
Mm,
can't. It can only focus on one
mhm.
thing at a
No.
time. You
Mm,
think you're multitasking, but you're not. What you end up doing is you're actually switching between your focus on one
yeah.
thing to another, which is depleting your energy,
Mm,
and it means you are less effective at each one because you're not really giving it the focus it needs. So
yes.
single-minded focus, one thing at a
Mm,
time, has
mhm,
proven to protect your overall energy and
mm,
preserve it, as well
yeah.
as produce better results. And
Exactly.
so if we shift over to Madison's story,
Mm,
I want to ask you about strategy. I saw a post of
mhm,
yours recently, and it was about how there are some ineffective strategies out there. It was about
mm,
how, while a lot of people can mean well, coaches,
mhm,
therapists, counselors, and wanting to help people through these kind of challenges like what Madison's going through,
mm,
at times it's not the right approach. It's ineffective. So I
mm.
want to start there. What would be an ineffective strategy if you were working with Madison, right? What would you recognize as not the right approach to take in helping her through the pressure that she's under?
Yeah, yeah. It was such an interesting story to look at Madison and her details, because I think many people can recognize themselves in this, and myself included. And I think with this one is ineffective strategy would be, oh, just focus on self-care, or throw some self-care in there, you'll be fine. Take a bubble bath at the end of the evening, or get up 2 hours earlier to make the most of your day, because she is very overwhelmed and she has a lot on her plate right now. And for me, it's never the one and done, or two things at once, or to be able to be so black and white with it. I think the holistic approach here, and for Madison as well, is so important as we dive into it. Even though, yes, self-care can be a small part of this, I think there's so much more when we look at this. This is a day in her life, and how are things going on, for the next couple of weeks with this. And God forbid Madison goes for another 6 months with this, and feeling that she's overwhelmed, the frustration is building, she can feel herself kind of drowning with this role, and wanting to please and take care of everything. We don't want that to lead to then burnout, because we often see with stress, of course, it goes from stress, chronic stress, to then burnout. And through those stages, I can see a few warning signs where this could possibly happen for her.
Yeah.
Mm,
And we are so quick to jump into what is the tool to use to fix
yeah.
something. And at times the tool that we intend are attempting to using could make things worse. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's not that she needs to, as you said, wake up earlier
Mm,
or just add more. In my
mm,
opinion, it's she needs
yeah,
to
yeah.
reduce, right? She needs
Yes.
to rest. She needs
Yeah.
to be able to have time for herself. And it
Mm,
doesn't mean adding layers. It's, if anything, it's the opposite. It's
yeah.
reducing things down. And it's
Mm,
very relatable to the simplicity that you were referring to earlier.
mm, mm,
How can we simplify this for her? And
yeah.
you touched on something that I want to ask about, and that is the people pleasing component, because that is
Mm,
throughout her story. She's
yeah. Yeah.
she's her children, whatever
Mm,
their needs are, she's chasing after, saying, yes, yes, I'll take care of
yeah.
this, I'll take care of this.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
work, everybody's coming to her, and
Mm,
she's falling into solving everybody else's problems.
yeah.
And I've heard you talk about how you recognize being a people pleaser in your past.
Mm,
I am a recovering people pleaser. I tell people
yeah.
all the time. So I want to get your take on people pleasing. Why do we fall into
Mm,
that pattern? Why do we fall into the pattern of people pleasing?
mm. I mean, we can see this throughout, like going, following the dots, but literally going backwards of this, and not to anyone's fault, and not to our fault either. But even just going back to our childhood often and looking at that, the root cause that often comes up of here of, you know, what what are we what character or what habits or what behavior is are we creating, I should say, to in fairness, to keep ourselves safe and to keep ourselves safe throughout, whether we're, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever the age years old, up until our teen years, up until adulthood, of learning these, coping mechanisms and wanting to keep the peace. If it's a very, let's say, traumatic or extensive childhood or home perhaps that we have grown up in, we're very easy and learn how to keep ourselves safe in creating this coping mechanism of, okay, how can I keep the peace, how can I keep everyone happy? I know that tone, I know the sound of that door slamming, that much is going to mean, XYZ later. Of the small things where we can pick up on as people, or in that sense of children, and carrying that throughout our lives to want to keep the peace and want to keep everyone happy and not go into a conflict or a fight or emotions where no one has been able to regulate, within that household, or really create that safe space for the child and family without. So I think, throughout, if we follow that line kind of back to our adulthood, we can often see this. And that's why I say, to not our fault, but we know with the people, we want to keep them happier. We want to say yes to things. We don't want to make it difficult because we know what has happened in our childhood with that. So this is then with us, for the rest of our lives, if it's with our partner or work colleagues or friends, and we create that sense of safety within ourselves.
Hmm. It's so often happening at a subconscious level with
Yes.
what when we're in our adulthood.
Yeah, of course.
We're fueled by this
Mm,
conditioning,
yeah.
and if left unchecked, if we
Mm,
aren't aware of it, if we don't interrupt the pattern, then we will
mm,
continue down that
yeah.
cycle over and over and over again
Mm,
of pleasing others,
mm,
fueled by the belief that this is how I keep myself safe.
yeah. Yeah.
That's really what it's all about. It's
Mm,
keeping it's a feeling of safety that
mm,
we are
mm,
trying to infuse in ourselves. And that's why
mm,
oftentimes I say this and people don't always like that I say it, but I say
mm,
people pleasing is actually quite selfish. It's a
mm, mm,
self-absorbed act.
mm, mm,
You might be telling yourself that, hey,
mm,
I'm doing this because I care so much about helping everyone else and I want everyone else to
yeah.
be happy. And that's a
Mm,
nice thing to tell yourself. And there may be some truth to it. You do really want to.
mm,
But if you really go to the core of it, the fuel behind people pleasing is
mm,
so you feel safe. You're
mm,
doing
yeah.
it
Yeah.
to in a response to a feeling of threat within
Yeah.
your own mind and
Mm,
body.
mm, mm,
So when you're working with someone who has people pleasing tendencies, as Madison
mm,
does here,
mhm.
how do you work through it with them, Rebecca? What are some of the things that you use to support them, or some tools that you give them to be able to overcome the tendency of people pleasing?
Mm, mm, yeah. Great question with this because I think it's such an important one, both as coaches, but I say that also because working one to one with my clients, you might experience this as well. Is I think it's also very important to look at the other aspects of it with therapists, other, mentors, I should say, but preferably with therapists and different work that they can do throughout this. Is you can always work with a coach together with a therapist, or a therapist before or a therapist after. All of this is completely up to you, but I say that in a sense of, it's important to look at, where are you with, again, childhood, as we were saying, and looking at this aspect of the people pleasing, or with a counselor you can work with there as well, for example, is that aspect I think is really important to have hand in hand as you're working through this. I can do as much as I can with this of supporting you and looking forward, because that's generally how coaches work, of not going, backwards into childhood. But I think that's really important to say here as we look at these tendency and behaviors and patterns that we have in that aspect, especially trauma related, to be able
Mm.
to get that right support. But with that being said, for us, if we're working together and looking at this, especially with Madison, and how this is kind of integrating with her work life, and both with her kids and partner and perhaps co-workers, and not putting herself first, that is a holistic approach of both, subconsciously looking at our self-worth, our confidence, where are her values, her behaviors, her habits with this, how can we support the root cause as best possible, and really get her to try and make small steps in a safe environment, with my support and with my guidance, and for her to try this in her day-to-day life as the present moment, because it's not going to be one session, we do this, it's done, or just take care of that aspect, and it'll be fixed, because you're not broken, and you're not broken throughout this of doing the work now, the inner work, but also the previous work, as I said, with childhood, and perhaps working with a therapist side by side, or doing that work throughout your adult life.
Yeah.
So with that being said, really of looking at it on several aspects, and how can you support this person, of then seeing, okay, we can actually do this, because it can be uncomfortable for her as well, of being able, starting to say no, or starting to work on with her self-worth and self-confidence, and answering the difficult questions, going through those questions and see what is coming up for her in terms of thoughts, emotions, behavior. um, so I'd say starting there, and then depending on what is coming up for her, and what paths are opening up, or emotions that are really coming to the surface, of supporting that with, both nervous system regulation, but also safe and soothing um, safety practices for herself in that aspect.
Mm. And there may be, and of course that would be where you'd gather in a conversation
Mm.
with
Mhm.
Madison, a need for some support through therapy, which
Mm.
I agree with your definition is more in revisiting the past and
Yeah.
being able to heal based off of an
Yes.
understanding of
Yeah.
all the root causes,
Mm.
which is not in my wheelhouse. And I know that
Mm.
your focus is more on coaching
Mm.
as well. And I've also found, and I'm sure you have as well, that
Mm.
based off of, everyone's unique, but my experience is that very often it isn't as necessary. It depends on the person, but
Yeah.
if we look at what's happening here in the present moment, and
Mm.
we learn the faculty, or develop the faculty of self awareness to be able to
Yeah.
notice the pattern. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter what the pattern really is or where it came
Mm.
from, but if you can observe the pattern and
Mm.
then be able to respond to it skillfully,
Yeah.
then it no longer fuels your activity. And I
Mm.
feel like, and I agree, it doesn't take just one meeting with
Mm.
someone. You
Mm.
have to
Yeah.
gradually build up that strength within yourself. And then
Mhm.
one of the things that I think Madison needs, and I know that you really talk about quite a bit, is setting boundaries. And you refer to
Mm.
them as,
Yeah.
I have it in my notes here, unbreakable boundaries. Is
Unbreakable.
how you,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
unbreakable
Yeah.
boundaries. Tell us about unbreakable boundaries, and what are some of the boundaries you think Madison needs to really establish for herself?
Yes. I mean, unbreakable boundaries is with this of, it is hard to speak our boundaries, and it is hard to state them and actually be very clear on them and what they are. And when we, receive, let's say, resistance, or someone, speaking and not following our boundaries, how are we working? How is our relationship with ourselves, but also in that environment, person, example. So unbreakable boundaries is really to sticking to, what are our wants, what are our needs, what do our boundaries sound, look like, feel like with us, again coming back to the nervous system, and as we shared before, of that safety. Because as you start doing this work, it can be a bit difficult and it can feel a bit uncomfortable. And I think really here with Madison as well, her boundaries in terms of, I think, speaking to both her client, but also her work colleagues, and as well as her partner, like her husband at home, of speaking those boundaries and not being afraid to be vulnerable in that sense, and where they are, and especially I think with work, like asking for help or delegating this, or saying, to her partner as she comes home, I need to go to bed earlier. I'm going to be in bed by 9. I need this rest. This huge project and event is happening. I can't do this as the deadline is tomorrow. So boundaries
Mm,
can look in so many different ways, both with time and how we're feeling in what is happening in that environment, but also the connection to ourselves. Because we want to know, with our boundaries, the biggest thing is, yes, we have that time and well-being for ourselves, but also knowing in that moment of when to remove ourselves. If our boundary then is being crossed, of, having that strength and stating our boundary, but also the connection to ourselves of saying, okay, I'm gonna remove myself from this environment because my boundary is not being listened to or crossed, in that effect.
yeah. There are two things there that I think people struggle with that I heard from you. And that is,
Mm,
one, clearly establishing it within yourself, like knowing what
yeah.
your boundaries are.
Oh
That's the
yeah.
problem a lot of the time. People just don't
Hmm.
even have them. They haven't set
Mm,
them. They haven't
yeah.
decided on what that boundary looks like.
Mm.
And then the second part, which could be even more difficult for people, especially those with people pleasing tendencies, is
Yes.
learning how to communicate those boundaries,
Mm,
how to be able to identify when someone is attempting to violate that boundary,
mhm,
and then how to respond to that.
mm,
The good
yeah.
news is, what we're talking about here, these are skills. These are skills
Yeah.
that anyone can develop, and it's a muscle. Just like
Mm,
any other muscle, you have to build it over
mhm,
time.
yes.
And the muscle that we're establishing here is one of being able to assert yourself
Mm,
with kindness and respect,
mhm,
to suggest to another person, hey, this is as far as I can go, and I can't go
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
With Now, in Madison's case, the other thing that she's really struggling with, Rebecca, is,
Mm,
look, the pressures of work are not going to go away. She
mhm,
is dealing with stress,
yeah.
and that stress isn't just going to disappear. Sure, she can rest more, right? She can set boundaries, but she has to, I think, work through the stress a bit better. And there's
Mhm,
something I've heard you say before, which is, you advise people to befriend their
mm,
stress.
yeah.
So, what does that mean to you, to befriend your stress, and how do you do that?
Yeah. Befriending our stress is, again, as I spoke about the backpack before, our stress is, it can look at, when we look at what is our stressors, our triggers, what is our perception of that? It is going to be different for me as it is for you, of what is causing our stress. What does that look like, both internally, of what is that, our thoughts, emotions, and behavior, but also externally and with other people, as well as triggers. And when I say befriend, is getting the closest connection that you can, and really leaning in, instead of any thought, example that is happening, or person, and immediately, pushing any emotion down in a backpack, dismissing it, not honoring our needs, wearing a mask. Befriending it is to welcome it and say, okay, again, we're going back to the signal, and with our body is always speaking to us. What is going on in that very moment that we need to actually be aware of, and aware of, because our body is smart. It wants to keep us safe. That has been from evolution, from time and time again. The more we can connect to our body, and let's say the greater connection we have, we can feel this in a moment's notice and understand what is happening there and then, to be able to support ourselves, whether that is, a trigger coming along based on a sight, a smell, a happening subconsciously, to going into a very stressful situation and knowing, for Madison, this event happening tomorrow, and it's all hands on deck, and it's going to be incredibly tense and incredibly stressful. What does she need to support herself in the best possible way, and look in that with, okay, this is what is going to happen in my body, let's say, physically, and emotions coming up, but also with our mind and how our brain works in that sense of learning everything that you can with stress, and how your reaction to stress, what does that look like in the different environments.
Yeah. Anticipating the demand,
Yes.
anticipating
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pressure.
Yes.
It reminds me of someone I worked with where he knew that certain weeks out of the month,
Yeah.
he would have to cover for someone else.
Mm.
And it was high demand. Just that one week, it
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
very intense. So
Mm.
what we worked through was creating a strategy for that, to
Yes.
say that,
Yeah.
hey, that would mean you need to carve out more time
Mm.
for resting,
Mhm.
refueling, and
Mhm.
recharging
Yeah.
during that week, versus
Absolutely.
saying, I have to figure out how to do more.
Mm.
It's the times when we have the greatest demand that we
Yeah.
also need to carve out the more time to refuel. It's
Yes.
just like a
Yes.
cell phone. With a cell
Absolutely.
phone, if I'm using my cell phone a lot, I have the navigation open, I have all these apps
Yeah.
running, then
Yeah.
it means it's going to need to be charged more that day than
Yes.
a
Yeah.
day where it's just sitting idly. We
Yeah.
operate in the same way.
We
And
do.
with
We do.
Madison, what happens in her story is something that I hear a lot. That is,
Mm.
she came home and of course, she didn't mean it, but
Yeah.
she took it out on her daughters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're very innocent in all of this.
Mm. Mm.
But I hear that so often, Rebecca. I hear people say,
Yeah.
I took it out on my kids. They're seeing
Oh.
something in me. My partner, I'm getting
Yeah.
very short with them and impatient.
Mm.
Tell me about how you would recommend someone works through that, which is, how do
Mm.
you lead? How do you not bring it home? How do you not, without intending to, right? How do you avoid taking it out on the people you
Yes.
love the most?
With this one, I can see in Madison and what's going on right now that she has so much on her plate. It's understandable that she is coming home, unfortunately, and this is happening as the kids, they want to be seen, they want to be heard. They're like, mommy, great to see you finally home. Her husband is there, they're cooking dinner, whatever it is that is going on. But I think also with Madison is what she can leave at work and really know, what is inside of my control and what is outside of my control. How can I, again, as I spoke of the mindful workday, how can I really close the books on, okay, I've taken care of this, and this at work. Everything's set for tomorrow. Yes, of course, emergencies can happen. She is the GM of a hotel. There might be an email or text or something coming in that evening. Crisis mode for the event itself. But what I would say of really leaving that in the door is, she can have in her toolbox a few practices of really, taking a few breaths, relaxing, if she is in the car, if she is, going by train home, whatever it is, she can still take those few moments for herself. And also, I think, give herself a lot of grace in this, as knowing, as you just spoke of before, that that kind of planning and preparation of knowing these few weeks are going to be really intense. This event is going to be really tense. Okay, can I bring food home with me? Or have we perhaps prepped a little because we knew this week was going to be a lot? Can I give myself some grace and know that I have a few things in the fridge freezer already, will be good to go, so I don't have to have so many things on my plate as I go home, and as the caretaker, the wife, the mother. We often say that work doesn't end at 5 or 6 o'clock, because we come home and then it's dinner and washing and the kids and doing homework and getting everything ready. So instead of her continuing on in this stress cycle till 9, 10, 11 p.m., what can she do to really shorten that space and give herself a break there as well? And I think that communication, we looked at with Madison's husband as well, of also supporting each other, is such a huge part. And that vulnerability there of saying, listen, this and this is going on right now. I'm feeling like this. My energy levels are like this. How can we support each other? How can you support me in this, so I can still show up as a mom and how I would like, as I enter the door during this stressful week.
Yeah. And it's not that she's in a situation where she doesn't have a supportive partner, because he is supportive of her.
Yeah,
However, if she doesn't ask for it, then she
that's the
won't get it,
thing.
right? So
Yeah,
she needs to learn how to ask for the help.
yeah.
And the other thing that you said there was about finding moments of putting in some practices even throughout the
Mm,
day.
mhm,
One thing that I've applied for myself
mm,
is creating associations throughout my day
mhm.
for some mindful breathing.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Every day, at some point, I am washing a fruit or vegetables as a snack in my
Mm,
day. Every time I do that, I
mhm,
associate that to deep mindful breathing. And now
mm.
it's not even something I think about. It's funny because
Yeah.
I was doing it once in the kitchen, and my fiance walked in and she
Mm,
tried to talk to me, and I was in the
yeah.
middle of the practice. And I had
Yes.
to tell her, I said, "Sweetheart, just give me a moment. I'm doing my practice." And I was doing it without even thinking about it. It just becomes such
Yeah.
an association for me.
Mm,
So with Madison, what are some ways in which you can incorporate those associations where, as you said, it's if someone, if she's not in a train, but if someone were in a train, that maybe that's an opportunity. It's like when I sit down in the train, or when I come and I sit in
yeah.
my car and before I start the car. It's when I
Yeah.
pull into the driveway, that's an opportunity. We're not talking
Mm,
about a 20-minute practice here. We're talking about
no.
some way to just ground yourself in a
Yeah.
practice that helps you to be able to have the energy and the mindfulness in
Mm,
what is it that you're about to do in the interactions, let's say
yes.
with her
Yeah.
daughter, so she's
Yeah.
not reactive,
Mm,
she can be a
yeah.
bit more responsive. So
Mhm,
I want you to imagine this scenario, Rebecca.
mm,
Madison's in the bathroom, right? She's
mhm,
bawling her eyes out. She walks out of the
mm,
bathroom and you're there, you're
mm,
standing there. Okay,
mm, mm,
what do you say to her? What's the first thing that you do to help her?
mm. Yeah. I see you. I mean, I hear you. I am here. Take your time. Take your time of whatever that is of coming up right now. Let that come up. Take your
Yeah,
time.
I love that. Just allow
Mm.
is what you're saying.
Allow, yes. Allow and release in that. And
Yeah.
and giving her, as much time as she wants in that moment. And for her to be able, because I think in that moment also so intense and so much with our emotions and frustrations, of just allowing her to catch her breath essentially.
Yeah. And
And
it's in a direct contrast to what you were saying earlier, right? And I love it because
mm,
earlier you were saying the wrong strategy would be adding more to her plate with these
yeah.
all these self-care things. And what
Yeah.
I heard you say is the appropriate strategy:
Mm.
space,
Yeah.
allowing, accepting
Yeah.
what comes up, not
Yeah.
even trying to fix it.
No. Yeah. Mm.
Right. Don't try to
Mm.
fix it in that moment.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
allow for it to be there. Give yourself
Yeah.
that grace. And so,
Mm.
Rebecca, as we get to the end of the our conversation here,
Mm.
I wanted to share some of ways in which people can connect with you, because I feel
Mm.
like you have a great deal of wisdom here in how to
Mm.
avoid falling into this pattern,
Mm.
preventing it, being able to really reset. And I know we were talking before we started recording that on your
Yeah.
LinkedIn page, and you could find Rebecca right on LinkedIn, Rebecca O'Brien.
Mm.
She has a ton of great content. That's how you and I
Mm.
connected, and that's how we know each other for as long as we have. You also have there in the featured page, the featured section of LinkedIn, I should say,
Yeah.
where you have your programs, one of them being a
Mm.
4-week program
Mm.
called Reset to Rise, Reset to
Yeah.
Rise, especially around the time in September when people are making those
Mm.
transitions from summer to back to the school and back to
Yeah.
school time. It's a lot of pressure.
Mm.
So people could find you there, but tell us a little bit more about that, some of the other programs that you have
Mm.
available for people who feel a little bit burnt out, they feel stuck in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. The 4-week program with Reset and Rise, as I said, that's, starts in September. I run it throughout, but I usually do a little opening and prep for September as we go back into work. And to also, not only get a taster of coach, because I think it's so important to find, who is your person, who is your great fit, just as them for me and me for them, but also knowing that, going into stressful times, as we spoke of before, you don't have to be alone in it. And you can go through and create a toolbox and get that support of looking at, as we spoke of before, a little reset. What do you need to release? What can you simplify? The relief of, like we said, stress management, and some tools for nervous system regulation. Looking at really what is important for you as you want to take the next few weeks forward or steps forward, but also the next few months, and to really rise into that and knowing, okay, I have my clarity here. I have my plan. I know what it's going to take of, this first goal that I have coming back from the summer. So I think it's important with that, with the taster of knowing, especially of people saying yes and raising their hand and like, I might need some help, because in many cases it can be difficult to voice that. And apart from the taster, like smaller program, I do have my Into Empowerment, which is my 12-week program. And like you shared there, Jay, the unbreakable boundaries, but the 4 pillars are with self-mastery, mindfulness, and mindset, high performing habits, and then unbreakable boundaries. So that is a little deeper dive into really, sustaining that peace and presence, and thriving in our careers, our goals, our partnerships. I hear this often of working both with, husbands and wives, of seeing that, the effects of coaching, and like we said, asking for help, whether that is with a therapist, a counselor, whatever it is within your life of, I want to grow, I want support, I want to do the inner work. And it reflects. And I hear that from, if the wife is my client, that her husband is saying to her, or vice versa. And it's wonderful to see, like, the changes are throughout. It's not just in your workplace. It is, affects with your immediate family and with friends, and especially how you're showing up for yourself. And again, that connection to ourselves is, I think, is so important, of how we are stepping foot and thriving in our life, both with joy and clarity, and productivity in our goals.
Yeah. The word I was thinking about as you were describing that, you just said at the end, was connection. The whole time I was
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
you're pointing to that word, right?
Mm,
Connection.
mm,
Connection with
mm,
people who matter the most in our lives,
mm.
connection to ourselves, connection to our
Yeah.
greater purpose. And if you are feeling disconnected, you're
Mm,
right, Rebecca.
mm,
At times, well, actually, I think all the time, getting help will
Mm,
fast forward your
yeah.
ability to reconnect. And
Yes.
so I highly encourage, go to LinkedIn, find Rebecca, send her a
Mm.
connection request, send her a connection request, connect with
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
on LinkedIn, and see more and learn more. Rebecca, I want to just
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking time out of the day today and really going through the story with Madison and providing such valuable insight. I really
Mm.
appreciate all the wisdom you shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a joy, and I love to be able to support and just see with these live examples. I think that's so important. Like, it doesn't have to be from one extreme to the other. Our lives is filled with these wonderful, let's say, examples of support or toolbox, or perhaps a change in perspective or healing that we can really appreciate and invite into our lives. So thank you so much for this, Jay.
You're most welcome. I feel like I could take this conversation with Rebecca and pull out 10 insights and 10 actionable takeaways, but I don't think that would be a good way to wrap up the episode. I think it's too much. So I will wither it down as best I could to what I feel were the most valuable insights and the most valuable actionable takeaways. Here they are. The first insight: be mindful of physical symptoms. Even the ones that don't seem like they're too substantial, listen to your body and notice if there are symptoms such as fatigue, feelings of lacking motivation. She even mentioned physical things like hair loss. And to not just chalk that up as something that is only a physical thing, or I have to just say that this is something that's going to pass. No, this could very well be a symptom of burnout or feeling anxiety. And to be able to address it sooner, go upstream, get to it before it becomes something that is really substantial and a very big health risk. The second insight is around people pleasing and how people pleasing is our mind and body's way of attempting to make us feel safe. I thought that was a really valuable part of this conversation, because we learn this from childhood, that if everyone is happy with us, everyone is pleased with us, we are safe. And that may have been true when you were very young, but that perceived threat may not be true as an adult. So there are holes in one's own self-worth if they need other people to like them in order for them to feel safe. So there's some work to be done in cultivating a sense of self-worth and developing practices that allow for you to feel safe in environments where you are interacting with other people and they are either rewarding you or they are criticizing you for your work. The third insight, and I bring this one up a lot, it comes up, it's a pattern, I think, in this podcast, that is to befriend your stress. I like the backpack analogy she used. We just throw it into our backpack and we suppress it. But the best thing to do is honor your stress, welcome your stress, listen to it, see it as a signal. It's something that's helping you. Befriend it rather than resist it. Actionable takeaways. The first one, I loved her mindful workday example, where rather than having this list of 10 things that you need to accomplish in one day, simplify it. Simplify it down to 1, 2, or maybe 3 at most. These are the main focuses for today. And have a very clear start time and a very clear end time with pauses throughout the day. So this is being intentional about how you set yourself up for success day in and day out. The second actionable takeaway, unbreakable boundaries. That is to know what your boundaries are, to then socialize them, and then be able to effectively respond to them or respond to someone who's attempting to violate your boundaries. There's some emotional work you need to do to be able to prepare yourself, anticipate someone attempting to violate those boundaries, and then be able to assert yourself and know the difference between, hey, here is an exception I'm going to make in this one instance versus here's me falling back into that pattern of people pleasing. If you have to remove yourself from that environment, do so. If it means you need to stay true to your boundaries. Third, actionable takeaways, to anticipate the demand. So if you know that this upcoming week is going to be a very tough week, you know that there's going to be a lot going on. That means you need to be able to identify when you're going to have those moments where you can take some deep breaths, where you can recharge. You need to look for them on your calendar. And maybe it's a transition between the car coming into the house or when you get on the train. because otherwise you are going to be setting yourself up to have that kind of reaction that Madison had with her daughters, and then you're going to regret it later. So know when that time is and make sure that you commit to those moments where you can take some deep breaths and you can recharge before you go from one thing to the next. Join us in our next episode of Unstuck, where you'll meet Jay. Yeah, that's me. I thought, why not have an episode where I tell you my story about how when I was stuck and how I worked to get unstuck. So we're having a special episode next week. I look forward to that one coming out. Until next time, thank you for listening.